Cheryl, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for chairing tonight's rally, and to all the other speakers. To Anne-Marie for her speech from behalf of Unite the Union. To Umar for his brilliant speech and obviously fantastic career he's got ahead of him. To my dear friend Manuel, whose memory is obviously not helping him. We first met in 1982, Manuel. You were very young at the time, and so was I. To Richard Murphy for fantastic. Whenever did you hear of a standing ovation for a chartered accountant before? And to Nadia for the way she put forward the real hopes, the real optimism, imagination and determination of young people in this country. Thank you very much for what you said. Rallies like this don't happen by accident, and we only organised it less than a week's notice. So I want to say a thank you to all the helpers and volunteers that have done so much in the past week to make sure this event took place. Because to fill a hall at a few days' notice is quite an undertaking, and it's invidious to name individuals, but I will do anyway. There's two who've done an incredible amount of work to help get this event underway, and that's Steve Battlemuch and Stuart Halferty for the work they put in for tonight. But not just the work they put in tonight, the work they put in for years and years on all kinds of good and progressive causes for this country, for the people of this city, and for many other causes. And so, coming together tonight, those of us that have met before in supporting the miners' strike in the 80s, in opposing the Iraq War, in opposing nuclear weapons, there are so many other issues that are bringing us together. And what is so remarkable about this summer and the campaign meetings we're having is the alliance of those that have got great experience over many years of campaigning, either to defend things or to gain things or to demand things, with a lot of others, young people particularly, who are put off by the Yabu sucks negative politics of sameness and instead want something very different. They've come and joined in together. What an incredible movement we're building here today. And whilst we're building that movement here today in Nottingham, this week we had 2,000 people in Newcastle in an evening meeting. We had 1,000 in Middlesbrough in the afternoon. In 2 days in Scotland, we had more than 3,000 people at different rallies in different places, and the list goes on. This, I think, is the 75th event we've done as part of this campaign, including the hustings, and there's at least another 30 events to go. The attendance at all of them is absolutely enormous. In every single one, we have to have an overflow meeting in another hall or in the streets outside. And indeed, when we held one in Camden Town Hall, we even found 3 or 4 teenagers trying to climb through a window to get into a political meeting. I was worried for their safety, I was worried for the window, but I was so excited at the idea that young people wanted to come to a meeting to look at an optimistic way of dealing with the future. And so we've got this great movement going. And what brings people together? Essentially, it's a movement for something. Now, every one of us in this room, I'm sure, has been at a protest of some sort over the years. All of us have been against something at some time, and that's usually what brings people together. But this is different, because this is looking at the possibilities of how you do things very differently in our party, in our society, in our world. Now, like all of you here, I was very disappointed, very annoyed and very angry at the general election result in May. Angry because a Tory government is there with an albeit small parliamentary overall majority on the basis of the votes of 24% of the population. And they are trying to reconfigure our society in the image of the 30s. I'm not sure if it's the 1930s or the 1830s, but certainly some kind of 30s. And, excuse me. And they are setting about that with gusto. And then you look back about the banking crisis of 2008, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but you look at what the alternative was that we were offering. Yeah, there was good stuff in the Labour manifesto, no question. There was very useful policies in it in lots of ways, and I supported those. And indeed, I spent a great deal of time campaigning in lots of places, not just my own constituency, to try and get those policies carried out. But, and this is the very big but, there was a fundamental flaw in the whole programme. The banking crisis of 2008, as Richard has explained, and many other economists have explained, was not brought about by greedy nurses, street cleaners getting too much money, by by teaching assistants in schools, by those working in children's centres, those on low-wage jobs in fast food restaurants or call centres, or indeed those working hard in factories or offices every day. It was brought about by an unregulated banking system. It was brought about by unremitting greed by those that ran that banking system. It was brought about by massive bonuses paid to those bankers and crazy investments that were made in the United States and other places. And so the government responded in the way that it had to do, and that was to bring those banks into public ownership and put in quantitative easing in order to keep the economy going. So far, so good. One of the problems was we didn't really bring the banks into public ownership. We bought shares in those banks, put those shares in a holding company to be sold off at a future unspecific date, and we now find that unspecific date is now, and we find the unspecific price is at a massive loss, and they're being sold off at a loss in the City of London. Surely it would be much better if those banks remained in public ownership and they were required to invest in a productive economy, invest in the infrastructure we need, to invest in the housing we need, and invest in the developing of high-quality manufacturing industry jobs that we all need. But no, that is not what is on the Tory agenda. And so when the results of the election had been distilled down, the question is, what should the Labour Party do about it? My own view was that we should have a serious debate about the policy direction of the party, not just on the economy, but also on international affairs and peace issues, because I have so much to say on that, and I will a little bit later on in my contribution. We didn't have that. Instead, we had a leadership election. And after a lot of discussion, a number of us decided that we couldn't allow this opportunity to pass by without every party member and supporter being given a real choice in this election campaign. And so I was asked to put my name forward, did so, and we started off with a fantastic flying start when we got 11 MPs nominating me. As you will probably be aware, 35 minus 11 is a big gap. Because you need 35 MPs to nominate, and the next day there was a huge swing towards us when it went up to 12 when I nominated myself. And so having gone up to 12, we crept up and up a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, but we weren't getting there. And then two interesting things happened. One was there was a debate in some of the media about the need for there to be a proper discussion that party members could be involved with. And secondly, there was a huge Twitter storm and Facebook messaging, etc., which had a big influence. And I say thank you to all those that observed what was going on and encouraged a number of Labour MPs to make a nomination, so that with plenty of time to spare, I counted it as 1 minute 50 seconds to spare, we made it onto the ballot paper. and we then started the process. So I do say a big thank you to those MPs that made a nomination, because it enabled this debate to take place. And I was struck immediately by the huge numbers of people that were attending the hustings. Many of you, I'm sure, were at the Nottingham hustings that took place, and many others. Huge attendances at them, people thirsting for a debate. And then, as the debates went on, we organised more and more meetings, and they've got bigger and bigger and bigger. And there are some principles around the campaign that I'm pleased to be such a part of. The first one is that it's a campaign about democracy in the movement and the party. And so the first thing we want to do is change the way in which policy is made within the party. So we don't have this idea of top-down policy making. Instead, everyone has a point of view. Everyone has good ideas. Everyone can contribute to policy ideas and policy development. We have put forward already a whole series of discussion papers on the environment, on the economy, on housing, on education, on rights for women, on investment in the north and northeast of this country, education, and there's plenty more to come. Every one of them is there for discussion and debate. So when people condemn our policies, I think two things. One is, I seriously doubt they've ever read any of the documents we've handed over to them. And secondly, if they have read them, they obviously haven't read either the first or the last lines of them, which says, please give us your ideas. Please take part in this kind of open discussion and debate. And that is the basis that we're putting things forward. Everyone has great ideas. Not every brilliant idea started around the tables of the members' tea room in the House of Commons. Some things happened elsewhere. And the second important principle is that we do not engage in the politics of abuse or exclusivity. Because I think what is deeply off-putting is when all politicians, either between parties or within parties, think their case is enhanced by the level of abuse and personal criticism they can make of somebody else. It sometimes can be very funny, it can sometimes be very hurtful, but it doesn't actually change anything other than turn a very large number of people off the whole kind of political process, because they think it's absolutely nothing to do with them. So if others want to pursue that line of politics, that's absolutely fine. They're free to get along with it. But our campaign is not part of that. We're doing something far more serious and I believe far more intelligent in the way that we're approaching this. And that's why so many people are taking part in this. Labour Party membership has now gone up a great deal. Affiliated union registered voting has gone up a great deal, and ordinary supporters have gone up a great deal. So there are now going to be over 600,000 people eligible to take part in this process between now and September the 10th. That is the largest ever political process of any political party ever in British history. And I think that's something we can be very proud of. So who says there isn't an interest and a thirst for a different and a more radical view of the world than the one that we're able to discuss here tonight and discuss at many more such meetings and rallies as this in the future? But, and this is a very important but, I would say, is to those that have come in and joined the Labour Party or become registered supporters or union registered voters, absolutely brilliant and welcome. But it doesn't all end on September the 12th. I make no predictions about what the result's going to be on September the 12th. There then has to be the conversion to the policies that many people clearly want our party to put forward, And there has to be a thirst and a determination to campaign for those, not just in the fevered 4 weeks before any election in the future, but to convert opinion, to change minds, to bring people in, to develop that huge, brilliant and strong social movement that will bring about real change in the future. So it's not just a summer of joy and love and all that at rallies. It's a longer haul about how we change our society as a whole. So please, when you go away from this meeting tonight, don't think, well, that was all right, that's a nice meeting, I've cast my vote, I'll leave it all to somebody else. Politics isn't about leaving it to somebody else, it's about doing it ourselves. So I'll give you another important thanks that I want to give. I have been in the Labour Party and trade unions all my life, as indeed many in this hall have. And when people say to me, isn't the affiliation of trade unions to the Labour Party a problem, I look at them with a deeply pained expression and say, actually, I think it's rather a good thing. And I'm very proud to be a member of a trade union. And I'm very proud of the connection of trade unions. 6 million people in Britain are members of trade unions. I'm not sure if it's what he had in mind, but when David Cameron made a rather odd speech in Parliament about developing the big society, I thought, wow, he suddenly understood what trade unions are about. I'm not sure it's what he had really in mind, but I'm very grateful to the unions that have supported Unite, that has given us enormous help and support and given us office space for our phone banking operation. And last night we're looking for the Guinness Book of Records here, we had 400 people in 7 rooms making phone calls as part of our campaign. Imagine that, just pause for a moment. 400 people in 7 rooms, all talking on mobile phones at the same time. It was noisy, but there was such enthusiasm there. To Manuel's union, the TSSA, for their huge help and support and giving us office space adjacent to his office. His office is interrupted all day long by our campaign. Manuel, we're sorry. It won't last much longer, it's okay. I'm sure you're enjoying it. To the other rail unions, the RMT and ASLEF for their support, to the Fire Brigades Union for their support, to the Bakers Union, Communication Workers Union, Prison Officers Association, Socialist Education Association for their support, and to my own union, Unison, for its nomination and its support. Richard outlined a lot of issues on the economy, and I would simply say this. If we run an economy on the basis that inequality is a good thing, that not paying tax is something virtuous, that promoting tax havens is a good thing, promoting a transatlantic trade and investment partnership which empowers and enfranchises global corporations at the expense of national governments is some other good thing, and that the idea that there should be greater poverty and greater obscene levels of wealth for the very wealthiest is a good thing, then I'm sorry, the economy is going in absolutely 100% the wrong direction. We've got to change it around. So we change it around by the suggestions that Richard made, and we also start to invest. We are too imbalanced in this country. Far too much is done by the service sector, far too much is developing around financial services, far too little about preserving and developing and enhancing the very strong manufacturing base that has always existed in this country, no more so than all the great industries that were once very strong in this city of Nottingham and the whole of the East Midlands region. So we're suggesting a national investment bank that will be available to invest in infrastructure. I mean, what a crying shame that they've cancelled the electrification of the Midland Main Line and the Leeds to Manchester Main Line. And that National Investment Bank would be replacing the lunacy, frankly, of the private finance initiative as a way of funding public services. Every hospital that's had PFI contracts to build it is in debt, because the millstone around the neck is the PFI payments that have got to come first. They come absolutely first, ahead of every other thing to do with patient care or anything else. Same applies to schools, same applies to so many local authority services. Can't we do things more sensibly and differently, where we use public resources to provide public services rather than selling off public resources to the private sector and then paying through the nose for them for decades and decades to come? And so we also look at issues of wage levels, look at issues of 0 hours contracts, and end the Tory abuse of language where they call a cut in wages an increase into the living wage. Work that one out. And instead understand and accept the proposals put forward by the TUC of a £10 an hour minimum wage, which would actually save money to some extent from in-work benefits, but would also give a level of decency to many of the lowest paid and poorest people in Britain. Isn't that something we should be doing? Now, that is the growth part of it. So we also invest in new manufacturing industry, because in this country we're very good at inventing things, pretty good sometimes at developing those inventions, but very bad at taking them into production later on. There's a whole history associated with this. And the idea that the state should stay away from any kind of investment in industry is frankly nonsense, and most other progressive economies don't accept that. They see a very big role for the public in enhancing and developing our manufacturing capability. There's 1 million jobs to be created out of environmentally sustainable industries. There's jobs to be created out of a better transport infrastructure. There's a great many jobs to be created out of solving the housing crisis by building the council housing that we desperately need all across this country. And so we invest our way to prosperity, we invest our way to doing things better. But we also do two other things. One is in education. I believe education to be something extremely important. And I believe this sort of systematic denigration of teachers and others that's gone on for years, sadly by politicians of all parties, is deeply reprehensible. Recognise teachers are professional people working very hard and doing their best to bring up our children. Also, look at the way in which access to education is becoming increasingly limited. I don't want preschool facilities. I don't like to call it school, because I like the idea that preschool-age children have an opportunity to play and socialise together and begin to understand what life is about, and it not be restricted either to the children of the very poor or the children whose parents can scrape together just about enough money to pay often very expensive nursery and preschool place fees. Surely we as a society and a country should look after all our children and give them all access to preschool opportunities. And then you move further up the scale in education, and you ask yourself, isn't the role of the local authority and the local education authority something that is very valuable, to create the concept of a family of schools, a family of education opportunities, and bringing together so you get the economies of scale for special facilities, you get a sense of cooperative working of all local schools and colleges, rather than the Tory idea, which is one of endless unlimited competition and the deconstruction of our education system into a combination of academies and free schools. I want them all to come back into the family of local education through local education authorities. And for older students, we can and must do much better at bringing back educational maintenance allowance, because that gives the opportunity for working class youngsters to go on to do A-levels and to get into college and university later on. It gives real opportunities for them. And do the opposite of what George Osborne is doing in his budget and the welfare bill, where he's taking away the maintenance allowance and the payment of fees to university students from the poorest backgrounds, instead saying they, like every other student, must end up graduating with a debt of £40,000 or £50,000. We've discussed how we'll fund university education. And I was opposed to the imposition of fees of £1,000. I was even more opposed to £3,000. I was even more opposed to the fees going up to £9,000. And I'm more opposed to the idea of lifting the cap altogether, so that the Russell Group and Oxbridge can end up charging fees of £25,000 or £30,000 for university places. Sorry, we all benefit from an educated society. Our trains are safer by qualified engineers. And can't we do what Scandinavian countries and others do by saying we all benefit, therefore we're all prepared to pay for it? And yes, it is expensive, and we figure that by raising corporation tax instead of cutting it, raising it by the massive, huge hike of 0.5% would be enough to pay for university fees. Now, I think that is something worth doing. I think it's worth striving for. I think it's wholly achievable. But above all, it shows a real value for education within our society. But there's another aspect to education. Yes, learning for work is important. Yes, qualifications are very important. I get that. I fully understand that. But there's also a value in learning as a whole. Why, oh why, are we so cutting adult education and opportunities for education for so many other people? And so these things are, to me, extremely important. But then there's another aspect to our society. If I said to you, do you all value the National Health Service? You'd say, why is he asking the question? It's obvious we do. Of course it is. The NHS is the most civilised, greatest achievement politically ever made in this country. It was the culmination of those who fought for the right to vote, those who got the right to vote for women, those who campaigned for all the things that brought about the 1945 Labour government, and it was an amazing achievement. And it was quite moving when we had a rally in Tredegar a week and a half ago, on the very spot where Aneurin Bevan used to speak to his constituents. And in the window of Nye Bevan House, he says, and it's a rhetorical question, he said, can a society that denies medical care when it is available to those that cannot afford to pay call itself civilised? Nye was right, and it's very dangerous what's happening to the NHS at the moment. The internal market, the bringing in of the private sector to run whole sections of it, the profit-taking out of the NHS, the continual limiting on the availability of expensive special medicines, and all that leads me to think that the Tories have got their real eye on making the NHS a privatised service of last resort in order to promote a private medical system of first choice for those that can afford it. And so we have to defend the principle of an NHS free at the point of use. We have to defend that principle and also end the internal market, repeal the Health and Social Care Act, and be proud of our NHS. And the last couple of points I want to make are these, that yes, we all applaud the National Health Service, but somewhere along the line our society has got very cold and very nasty. It's got very cold in that we allow our newspapers to make routine condemnations of people who legitimately and legally claim benefits to which they're allowed, who condemn a society that condemns those with often complex disability issues, sometimes including mental health issues, to availability to work tests, which they pass in the sense they're passed as available to work when they're clearly not. They then lose many of their benefits. They end up in a deeply distressed state and then have to go through a complicated and often very lengthy appeal process. Sadly, people have even taken their own lives and committed suicide in that level of desperation. And still, relentlessly, the abuse of those on benefits goes on and on. And then they come out with a benefit cap which says we're going to cap benefits at this figure, 25,000, then 23,000, 20,000 out of London, as if those families are receiving that sum of money. I represent an inner London constituency where a third of my community live in the private rented sector. Private rents are very high. Those in receipt of housing benefit don't get enough to meet the excessive rent levels that have been charged and are forced to move out and live elsewhere. What is happening now in London and beginning to happen in every other city across Britain is a process of social cleansing by a combination of excessive rents and insufficient levels of benefit. And then you think, well, if there's so much being spent on the welfare budget, why isn't it working? Well, it's not working for the reasons I've just given you, but it's also something deeply troubling about the numbers of people that end up falling through the safety net in its entirety, end up sleeping rough, end up in destitution, and end up sleeping on the streets or queuing up to try and get a shelter for the night in every one of our major cities. Cannot we, as a Labour movement, be proud of what our principles are and stop joining in that vile rhetoric that is promoted by those that don't want a cohesive society, and instead say that we want to live in a society that genuinely cares for all? And when a number of us voted against the welfare reform bill at its second reading when it came before Parliament in July, we did that because we believe opposition to this bill is the very core of the principles of the Labour movement, and we should oppose this bill for everything it is and everything it stands for. This campaign is about, at one level, a position of leader and deputy leader of the party. But it's also about something else. It's about people wanting something different, wanting a society that doesn't blame the latest minority that's arrived for any problems that we've got, but instead invests in sorting out the housing, education, health and all the other problems that we've got. A society that reduces the level of inequality. A country that doesn't go to war alongside the United States whenever any president comes calling, demanding it. And a country that fulfills its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to take steps towards disarmament by not renewing the Trident nuclear missile system in 2016. Now, none of these things are easy, and an international outlook and policy that at one level tries to protect the world's environment rather than exporting pollution elsewhere, that recognises the numbers of displaced people around the world as a result of war and conflict and environmental degradation, deserve a humanitarian approach, not a military solution. And that we don't use the language of abuse and calling people insects because they're merely trying to survive in their lives. And so the language that's been used against those people in Calais I find deeply offensive, and we should be doing something very, very different. So we've come together. We've come together in tens of thousands of people all across Britain, excited by the idea of doing things differently, excited by the idea of a more decent, egalitarian, equal society. So we come together, whatever our backgrounds, we come together in unity to achieve these things. That is something that's optimistic and exciting. And I tell you this, when people meet together, do together, demand together, dream together, think together, achieve together, they're much happier, much happier. Imagine instead of going to those kind of campaign events and having those kind of optimistic discussions, you stayed at home, you turned on the television, you got angry with the news, then you shouted at the set, then you threw things at the set, and then you got more angry and you started throwing bigger things at the set, and you end up breaking the set. All you end up with is a broken television, a deep sense of anger, and you've absolutely not changed anything except making yourself very angry. And so when we do things together, we achieve a great deal. The opportunities of communication by social media give us the chance of coming together in a way that was never there before. It gives us a chance to completely bypass whatever Rupert Murdoch says, thinks or does about any of us. It gives us that hope, that opportunity. So, my friends, together we are very, very strong. Together we can achieve things. Together we can make a massive difference. So let's stay together for the long haul and achieve all of that and more, and liberate the minds of attitudes of young and old alike to achieve that decent, better world. Thank you very much.